again, and welcome to another episode of I Can Do All Things. Our core scripture is Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. You are watching on the Holy Spirit Broadcasting Network, and I am your host, Martha Sanchez. We are doing today part 2 of an episode where I interviewed Raul Lopez Jr., and we were talking about how you can overcome your childhood traumas. So, Raul, thank you for being here again, and welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
You know, there's some people that might have not watched part 1, which I really encourage you to go back and watch part 1 when you get a chance. But again, I'd like you to introduce yourself. Raul has written 8 books, and this is the book that I would like for you to share with them about why you wrote it, and all the practical things that you talk about in the book.
Okay, this is my core book. I've written this version twice. It's titled "Heal the Boy and the Man Will Appear." Subtitle of the first one is "Learn the Importance of Understanding and Expressing Your Emotions." We just talked about that in episode 1, and then the second one is subtitled "Transforming Childhood Trauma with God and Psychology," and we're going to get into that today some more.
We're going to do more practical things.
Yes. We'll talk
how
about
you can overcome childhood trauma.
Tips and tools to overcome it and understand it.
Do you believe that everybody has childhood trauma?
Oh, I do, yeah. Whether we know it or not, trauma follows us into our adulthood, and a lot of times we don't know why. And I'll talk in a little bit about how I figured it out.
Right. So let's dive into that. You were how old when you saw a vision that God was showing you about your particular traumas?
So I was, when I saw the specific incident that we're about to tell you about, I believe I was in my early 30s. I was in my early 30s already. And God had showed me a few visions that even led me to that, that I didn't realize were from God. I just saw things as though you're sitting there right now. I would have visions around me. And I'll tell you one quick one before I get into the one that actually transformed me. This was what led me to, there has to be more to life than what I'm living. In episode 1, you asked me, was there something that happened while you were incarcerated that helped you change? And this is a vision that I had while I was in prison, in San Quentin prison. I was out on the prison yard, right? And I'm on a table with 3 other guys. We're playing dominoes on a table. And I was affiliated with, the prison and gangs and the whole thing back then. And everybody that we hung out with were here. And there's probably, 30, 40 of us sitting around. And one of the guys came towards us and he said, "We have to get down," meaning we got to go fight on the yard, right? Okay. And I remember looking at the guy next to me, and this is my first time I'd been to prison, and I think I'd only been there a couple of weeks. And I looked over at the guy next to me, and I looked at him. He's like, "We got to do what we got to do." And he basically stood up, took off his jacket. So in the fraction of a second that it took me to stand up from my chair, just stand up, I was looking over like this, and I saw everybody else getting up. There was a much older man over there. And at the time, I was in my early 20s, so he's probably a little older than I am now. but in my early 20s, he looked like a lot older of a man. But he was also beat up, very skinny, gray hair, kind of balding. Didn't look healthy, probably had a very rough life. But I saw him standing up, this really skinny old man, and he was jumping up and down with his fist like this. And he was saying, let's go get him. And so like I said, in a fraction of a second, standing up and looking over, I saw him. And then I had this vision of him sitting in a living room on a lazy boy chair. And there were a bunch of kids, like grandkids around him. And God said, at the time I didn't realize it was God, God said, that's where he should be. He shouldn't be here fighting on this yard.
Yeah.
And I saw that, and then I in a flash of a second, I'm still looking, and then I'm sitting in the chair. I see myself sitting in that chair. And God said, that's where you're going to be. And that was that fast, stood up, went and did what we had to do. And then, so it was this vision that connected to me, but I didn't really think a whole lot about it. I didn't understand where it was coming from. But I did know that the seed was planted over and over again with me in these visions that I would have, is there's more to life than what you're living. That's what I kept hearing. There's more to life than what you're living. So when I saw that and, a couple other things going on, real wild stuff in prison life, I had that in my mind, like there's more to life. So when I got out, I went on a journey of trying to heal and understand even what healing was. And in short, before I got to this next vision that actually shifted my entire life, I was forced to go to college. We talked. I don't know if we haven't talked about that yet.
We haven't talked about it, but
Yeah.
before we even go there, for those of you who haven't watched part one, can you give them a brief
Yeah.
summary of how from young, all the events that transpire until
Okay.
you're in your 20s and you're incarcerated, and it wasn't the first time.
Right. Yeah.
So-
So bullet points. Watch the first episode.
Yes.
Age of 7, 0 to 7, very close family. Family of his and hers, I call it. My mother had 2 kids, brought it to the family. My father had 1, and then together they had me. Very close to my father. Age of 7, my mother put me on a plane from San Jose, California, flew me to Alaska, and I wasn't able to see my father, and it really broke me. This was the childhood trauma that I didn't realize was a childhood trauma at the time, but it really broke me. Depressions, anxieties, all of these things. And I started living a wild life, just wild and full of rage and loss. By the time I was 9, I was doing drugs. At 13, I conceived my first child, and then at 14, I got incarcerated. Between 14 and 24, I was in a facility the majority of those years, ending up in San Quentin prison, where I just mentioned that I had that vision.
That vision.
Yeah.
So now you get out of jail and you want to make a change.
Yes.
And you go to try to get into college. So
Yeah. So I'm actually unique situation. I'm forced to go to college by my parole officer, and it is unique because what I did know before I studied self-development, before I fully found God and college and all of these things, something told me, God, again, not knowing at the time, you got to move from where you live, or you're going to end up right back where you were. You've heard the 5 people you hang around is who you are.
Right.
I didn't understand that back then, but that was what I knew. I needed to move. So I went to my parole officer. I said, hey, I need to move. I need to get out of here. He's like, you can't leave here. You're on parole. You got to stay here for 3 years.
Right.
And I said, if I don't leave, I'm going to go back to prison. And he saw my sincerity, that I
Yeah.
didn't want to go back. And a lot of guys, it's just a revolving door, back and forth,
Right.
like I'd been for the last 10 years. So
that was wisdom.
yeah, it was godly wisdom that
Yeah.
I don't know where it came from besides God, because
Yeah.
I can't say I had any wisdom back then. So my
And
mother.
you didn't give up.
No, I
You-
kept.
you
I fought.
persisted.
I fought for it, and my mother had moved to a little town from San Jose called Cloverdale, way out there. Actually, it was Healdsburg, way out Santa Rosa area, California, Northern California. And she had bought a big property, and she had a little like studio on the side of her house. And she said, "Well, you can come and live here." So I told him that's where I wanted to live, and he said, "You got to go to their parole office and ask them permission if you can move into their county, and we'll transfer your parole." So I went, and in short, the parole officer said, if you go to college, you could move into my county. By this time, I'm 25. I hadn't even graduated high school yet, right? So I just said, okay, I'm going to do whatever I have to do. And he said, well, when you bring me a paper that says you're enrolled in that college, then you can live here. So I went to the college, and I was like, I need to go to school here. They said, take an assessment. I took an assessment. They basically laughed at me, like, you're not close to ready for college courses, right? And I was like, okay, so what do I need to do? I need to go to school here. That's, the determination. I need to go to school here. What do I have to do? And they said, we have this little trailer on the side of the college, big campus on the side of the college, where you can go get your high school equivalency. And then after that, you can start taking college courses. And I said, if I go to that trailer, will it say I go to school here? And he said, yes. So I said, give me the paper. Signed it. Took it to the parole officers. Here we go. He said, yes, okay. Took me 2 full years.
Determination.
Yeah, determination, decision. I'd made a decision. True decision, right? But I went to this little trailer. It took me 2 years just to get to my high school equivalency. That's how far gone that I was and behind. But then I started taking college courses. And the first college course, one of the first college courses was Psychology 101. And that's where my path started to self-development and understanding life, right? All these things that were going on, understanding like, hey, in fact, I talked about those 3 questions. Why do I feel why do I act the way that I act? Why do I do the things that I do? And why do I feel the way that I feel? In Psychology 101, the thick book, answers those exact 3 questions. So
Wow.
they had come to me throughout my entire life. And when I saw them in this book, I was really shocked, like, oh, what? And literally, if this happened to you as a child, you may act like this. You may feel like this. You may do things like this. And I was just really shocked. But what hit me also was, well, 2 things. 1, I was shocked that there were answers to those questions. But 2, I thought, if they're in this book that every college student has to take, I'm not the only one asking these questions. So it really just kind of opened up my mind. Now, with that said, and I think this is where my closer visions and things where God started to speak to me came, is my psychology professor. She was Dr. Collins. She was a Native American practicing her Native American spirituality, and she combined it with psychology. My mind just, talk about neuroscience and click, 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 all these things just going on in my brain. It put me on a whole new path. The same way that when my mother looked at me and said, "You're not going to see your father again," that my mind just went crazy and just in a fog. This switched it and it started clicking, lights going on, all these things that I started to understand. So I really dived into psychology, neuroscience, biology, every science of the mind and the body, right?
Yes.
Psychology is science. Biology, what we eat matters, right? That's all science. And so I understood the science side of things. And then from there, I knew the whys. I was like, wow, I understand these things. But there still was something wrong. And that's where the healing was needed. And that's where God came in.
And so you saw this vision where you found yourself in a field and you understood what had happened to you. And God gave you this vision. At what point in time did this happen? When you were already studying all of this?
It was
it before?
It was after studying all of these, all the way to Stanford. I studied just psychology wherever I could in science. It was after studying all these things, and
So you moved to Stanford?
no, I was actually, I ended up living in Santa Rosa while I was in college, and then from there I moved to Vacaville, and I would drive back and forth to Stanford, because back then there was no internet college. You had to drive.
Yeah.
So I would drive back and forth. There's probably an hour and a half drive each way, but I was determined, right? I had made a decision. So after I learned the science side of things, like I'd mentioned, there was still something wrong, even though I knew the answers to all these questions I'd been asking my whole life. So that's when I started to seek God and going to church. And I met a pastor, incredible pastor, changed my life, another next step in changing my life. And he used to hug me. And he knew I was fatherless. And he knew because he came from the same background. In fact, he wrote a book called Father Wounds. And then mine was Heal the Boy and the Man Will Appear. And we used to sell them together because they were a good match, right?
Yes.
But what he taught me was, he said, "Raul, keep coming back to church." And he said, "Learn to quiet your mind and soak in prayer," which is basically meditation, pray and just quietness. And it took me a very long time to quiet my mind. If we're talking about tools, if you don't know that you have control of your mind, practice. Because our minds do this nonstop. Mine never stopped. From the second I fell asleep to the second I woke up, boom, 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 boom. It was always some kind of stress, depression, anxiety, worry, and concern, all of these things all the time. So it took me a while to learn to practice, but to actually soak in prayer. And I learned that when we're praying, we're talking to God. But when we're soaking and we're meditating, we're listening to God. And then God started to speak to me. And I know for a fact that he always spoke to me, but I just never could hear it with all the noise going on, right? That's the enemy trying to block.
Yes.
So as I got better and better at soaking in prayer and meditating and these things, one day I had this vision again, and God took me from where I was meditating into this field. And go back a little bit too, because I didn't talk about it. But throughout my whole life, when I was trying to do better, I always had this wall, like it was a literal wall, within me that I would hit, right? And it was weird. I could see it was like this brick wall. And I would I want to be better. I want to do this. I want to do that. But I would just hit this wall, and I would stay wherever I was at. So as I was learning and growing through psychology and seeing psychologists myself and seeing therapists, and I did a whole lot of work to shift and to change myself. I remember a psychologist, a world-renowned psychologist, once asked me, she tried to do a process with me, and she says, "Okay, tell me about this wall." And I said, "I don't know, it's just there." And I said, over the years, at one point, I could never see over it or around it. She said, and I said, "It's shrunk, but it's still there."
So you had seen this wall many times?
Throughout my entire life, yeah.
You knew that there was something that was blocking you from
I knew
moving on.
I knew there was a block, and I didn't know what it was. It was metaphoric, and it was before I understood God and a lot of these things, psychology and all this. It all kind of came together.
So until this psychologist told you to talk more about it.
Yeah.
Then tell me what happened. Did it happen then when you were talking with her about it?
It
or
happened
was
after.
Something after?
It was after, but part of what she did helped me understand. So she showed me the wall, or she asked me about the wall, and I visualized the wall. And I remember her saying, "Well, can you see over the wall?" And I could, and I would go like this, and I could see over this wall. I can see it now, and I can see over the wall. And she says, "Well, what's over there?"
Yeah.
And I said, "I don't know, freedom." That's what came to me, freedom.
Wow.
And she was like, "Freedom? What do you mean?" I go, "I don't know. You asked me what it is, and that's what I said, it's freedom." And she did some metaphors that I do with people now. Some of my clients, she said, "Well, can you put a ladder on the wall and climb over it?" So, I was doing this process and I'd put the ladder and I'd say, I can put the ladder, but I can't climb it. She said, well, can you picture a door in the wall and walk through it? And I said, I can picture the door, but it won't open, it's locked. And she went through these processes and she says, well, continue to do the work and really understand what this wall is. So I said, okay. So that was the science side, but then praying and meditating, understanding this wall was shrinking, and that I did see, she asked me, what's over the wall? So before I never realized it was freedom, but it was also a beautiful field, beautiful colored sky, purple and blue, just this incredible sky. And I remember there's like one tree way out there in the field. And so when I learned to soak in prayer, I'm meditating one day, and I end up in this field, like I'm sitting here with you right now. I end up in this field, and the wall is gone. It's completely gone. And I'm like, oh, I'm here. Like the wall is gone. I mean, it was just, wow, this wall is gone. And I'm standing there. So I try to take a step into the field, but I'm stuck and I can't move. And I'm like, what? The wall is gone. The field is here, but I can't move. And as I'm kind of doing this, I look over and I see a little boy, a little 7-year-old boy. And I look and I realize it's me when I was 7 years old. And this is where I discovered that I had a childhood trauma in my 30s, right? I didn't know why all these things were going on in my life. And I looked over at myself at 7, and interestingly enough, there was no voice. We were talking, fully talking, but there was no voice. And I looked, and I said, you're my wall? You've been holding me here for all of these years. Like, I was upset. That was my first reaction. Like, I was upset. And this little boy, he just looked at me, and he said, I'm not holding you here. You're holding me here. And when I talk about that, it gets me, because I realized, and one of the stories I didn't share is when I was in Alaska, and I was broken, and I was depressed, and the teachers would say, what's going on with you at school? I was also crying a lot. And kids would make fun of me all the time. They would always make fun of me, cry baby, and this and that. And I remember one day when I looked at these kids, and this is where I became full of rage. And inside, I said, I'm never gonna cry again, and no one's ever gonna laugh at me again. And that's why I became such a fighter and rage all the time. If I thought somebody was looking at me for too long, or I thought they were gonna laugh at me, I would just attack them. So I did that for many, many years, and that's why I started getting incarcerated, being drunk and getting in these fights and all this crazy stuff. So I felt it when he said, you're holding me here. And I realized that day on the playground, when I said, no one's ever gonna laugh at me again, and I'm never gonna cry. What I created, being shown in this vision, was an alter ego. And this alter ego stepped in front of that little boy and said, I'm gonna protect you. So for all of those years, I would fight, and I would do crazy things, and I was just tough, and I didn't care about nothing. I didn't care about myself, I didn't care about nothing. I was just protecting this little boy from anybody harming him. So when he said, you're holding me here, I realized all these years that I was like, the freedom, looking over the wall, it was this little boy going, I wanna be free, let me go. And so I looked at him, and when he said that, I understood it. And I knelt down, and I just hugged him. And just words started coming from above, and I started to apologize to him. I said, I'm sorry. I love you. You are happiness. You are joy. You are light. And I'm just pouring into him, and I'm forgive me, and I'm apologizing, I'm hugging, and there's so much love, and I'm just holding him. Going back further, my father died very young. He was 47, based on his lifestyle. So by this time, he'd been dead almost 10 years. So as I'm hugging myself and I'm apologizing to myself, I love you. You are the light of the world. You are joy. You are happiness. And I'm just pouring into him. I started to call him son. And as I'm saying, I love you, son. You're the light, son. You're the joy, son. At the same time, I'm going, this is not my son. This is me. I knew it was me. But then everything shifted, and I felt my father holding me from behind the same way.
Wow.
And he's saying, I love you, son. I'm sorry, son. He's apologizing to me. It was just life transforming again, the healing side of things, because I understood. And the next thing I know, we're all three standing there, and we're looking up, and God's speaking. He's saying to us, I love you. You're my son. I love you, son. You're the light of the world. And he's just speaking and pouring. It was like, I always say, like a tidal wave. Picture like an 80-foot tidal wave just hitting you, all this energy just speaking, and God's speaking to us, and it's just hitting me. And my father disappears, and for some reason I go like this, and the little boy is in my hand. And I look at him, and I'm prompted to put him into my heart, and I went like this. And my heart softened. And it was at that point that I realized, at that age on the playground, when I said, no one's gonna laugh at me again, that my heart hardened. It was hardened for all of those years, and just mean and tough and angry and all of these things. And so when I put him into my heart, my heart hardened, softened again, and I felt it. And then the little boy was in front of me, and he started to walk into the field, and I just looked at him. I said, you can go, you're free. It was him, didn't need to go. I said, you're free. And he started to walk into the field. Then he stopped, and he turned around, and he looked at me, and I saw him hesitate. And I looked like, why are you stopping? But again, I thought, no, that's me. I'm hesitating.
Yeah.
I've been holding this kid here this whole time. So I said, no, you're free, you go. And he left. And he walked into the field, and he just disappeared, and I looked up. And God said, in short, he said, all of this life didn't happen to you. It happened for you. And he showed me my life. Love and friendship and family at a very young age. Lost for so many years on the street. Wisdom and knowledge you get from the streets. College and understanding the academics of understanding all these things. And now God and healing came. And he said, your calling is to go into juvenile hall and work with kids so they don't end up living the life that you lived. And that's where I started my journey as far as authors, speakers, and coaching goes.
Wow, that's powerful. So what if somebody recognizes that something happened to them? Because I assume that's when your whole life just transformed. And did that prompt you to start Tag Talks? How did that come about?
Yeah, Tag Talks came later when I branded Tag, but it did prompt me to go into juvenile halls and share my story. All the stuff that I'd learned from the streets, from the psychology, from being in prison. I would work with these kids who were headed to prison, and I'd explain everything I was teaching. And honestly, what got me into what I do now was a guard standing behind me. There's always a guard in the room while I was teaching with these kids. And he asked me, how much do you get paid to do this? And I said, I don't get paid to do this. And he goes, you know why? And I said, why? And he goes, because you don't ask. And I go, what? He's all, people come in here and do less than you do, and they get paid to come in here. And I go, really? He goes, this is an industry. He goes, have you written a book? And I said, no. He's all, everything you're teaching them, put in a book. And then when you have your book, you go talk about what you're doing wherever you can, and then you sell your book. He's all, look it up, this is an industry. And way back, this is the late 90s, right? I mean, this is, early 90s. No, late 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah, the term coach wasn't even out there. It was mentor or consultant, right?
Yeah.
So I looked into it, and I found like Bob Proctor's and Tony Robbins and all these guys. And I was like, wow, this is an industry. But I just kept sharing my message. Churches, prisons, juvenile halls, all these places. And then people started coming to me and asking me, hey, can you help me share my story? I loved your story. It's so powerful. Yes, I'm going to buy your books. Can you help me? I want to do the same thing. So I started helping people. And then as I got a bunch of clients, we put on events, and they could all come and share their story. And one day we were doing different events. I was calling them something different each time. Excuse me. And then I said, well, what are we doing? What are we doing with these messaging? And I really sat down, prayed about it, and thought about it. And I said, well, we're all being very transparent in who we are, right? We've accepted the life we lived and the things we've experienced. And we're not victims of them, but we've overcome and understand it happened for us. So we've accepted these things, and we're helping people grow by sharing them. But the G is double, because every time I share my message, even today, I grow. I heal and I grow. And then other people hear it and they heal and they grow. So Tag Talks, Transparency, Acceptance, and Growth came from me sharing and helping other people share and get their messages out there.
So as of now, how many people do you think you have helped to put in your books? Because once they share their story, a lot of times you end up putting them in your book, right?
Not all, but
all.
In the book, I don't know, in my books and things that I've helped people do their own books, and my own books, there's a few hundred. As far as the speakers, we've had hundreds also. Not all speakers. I have different content packages, I call them, where some come and speak for a 7-minute to basically get a nice video of their talk on a beautiful stage so they can get their message out there and be seen and be found. And they can tell people, I'm a speaker if you want to hire me to come and speak. And then we have bigger packages where people come and they speak at multiple events, and then we put them into our books and things.
Why do you think it's important for somebody to share their story, especially when they've had a transformation?
So what I always tell everybody is your wisdom is not common knowledge. Wisdom is life experience that you specifically have had, where common knowledge is the light turns red, you stop. The light turns green, you go. Everybody understands that at some point, right? Wisdom comes from experience, emotional experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You've learned things in good things that you've done. You've learned things in hard times that you've had, and you've gained the wisdom from it. So what I tell people all the time is it's very important to share your story, because whatever fire you've come through, there's somebody else in that fire right now. So in a sense, your wisdom is water and helping them come out of that fire. So people need you. right? And if you can help and serve in juvenile hall and in prisons and places like that, like I have, that's incredible. But there's also people out there who will pay you to help you come through the challenges that they have. So I call that, I say people will pay you for your past. They'll pay you for your past to improve their future.
That's amazing. What is something that you would tell someone that is stuck, like hitting that wall? Can they read your book and be able to find practical things to be
Yeah.
able to overcome and change
Absolutely.
or bring that healing that they need?
My job, my calling is to plant seeds for you to seek and continue to grow. So the first version of Heal the Boy and the Man Will Appear is specifically my story and what happened from a very young age, even when my parents were married and the traumas and things that were going on, and then kind of how I came out of it. A lot of what we talked about now is more in detail in the first book. And then the second version, with God and Psychology, talks more about the psychology side of things and some of the people I've studied with, Dr. Joe Dispenza, Tony Robbins, these guys who I've learned great wisdom from, in addition to healing from God. So what I say is, if you don't like who you are today, that's not who you have to be tomorrow or even a minute from now. You don't always have to be that way. A lot of my clients that I work with, they say, this is just the way I am. And I go, no, it's who you are today, but it doesn't have to be who you are if you're not happy with it. So self-awareness, know that there's something wrong. If you have that internal thing like something's wrong, then seek. Seek and you shall find is out of the Bible too, and it's truth. Seek and you shall find. If that book will plant a seed for you, Heal the Boy and the Man Will Appear. It's available anywhere. Google it, key it in somewhere, and you'll find it.
Is there a scripture that resonates with you that you like to share with everyone?
Yes. This is how powerful you are. If you are a person of faith, then you've heard this, you've seen it, and you need to believe it. Okay. People like to put their power away. John 14:12, I think. John 14:12, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but in short, Jesus says, you can do anything I can do as long as you believe. How powerful is that? What did Jesus do? Think about the things he did while he was here on earth. He raised people from the dead.
Yes.
This is even a weakness to say, I don't expect myself to raise people from the dead, but he said it. You can do anything that I can do and more. And greater.
Yes.
So really understand that you have the power to be somebody else and heal and love and serve others at a capacity higher than Jesus, because he said that to you.
Great. Well, we're at the end of this episode. You have shared a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And don't forget to tune in next week and share this program with anybody who you feel has gone over some childhood trauma and that needs healing, because it will help them.
Amen.
Take care and blessings to you.